My fiancée forced me to sign a contract, giving her 40% of my salary the night before our wedding. I signed under pressure. But when it was time to say, I do, I exposed her betrayal in front of 200 guests and left them all speechless. I'm 28 years old. I work in tech. Well, I used to work there until recently, but I'll get to that. And I need to tell this story, because what happened 3 months ago basically blew up my entire life in the most public and humiliating way possible. I guess I should start at the beginning. When I met Nicole like 3.5 years ago at a work conference, one of those boring ones where you basically go to get free coffee and pretend you care about PowerPoint presentations. She was working in marketing for another company and we started talking during the break. You know, that typical awkward conversation between strangers that suddenly becomes easier, and we ended up going to dinner that same night. Honestly, I thought it would just be that, a dinner. But things flowed naturally and we started dating seriously like 2 months later. She was pretty, funny, we had things in common, and my parents adored her from the moment they met her, which was important to me because I've always been close to my family. Her parents also seemed cool at first. A bit formal maybe, but nothing weird. The first 2 years were good. Normal, I'd say, with the typical couple fights, but nothing serious. We moved in together after the first year, a small but comfortable apartment downtown, and everything seemed to be heading where a serious relationship is supposed to go. I was making good money at my job as a software developer. She also had a decent salary, and even though we weren't rich or anything, we lived comfortably and could save a bit each month. I proposed to her like 10 months ago, on a trip we took to the beach. Nothing super elaborate but romantic, and she said yes, crying and all that. I remember I called my parents that same night and they were happy. My mom started crying on the phone, and my dad told me something like he was proud of me, that Nicole was a good girl. And honestly, she did seem like it. I mean, at that moment, I was sure I was making the right decision. The wedding planning was stressful, I'm not gonna lie, but I guess that's how these things are. Nicole wanted a big wedding, elegant, with like 200 guests, and even though it seemed excessive to me, I didn't want to ruin her special day. You know, because brides always dream about that and all that stuff. Her parents insisted on paying for most of the expenses, which seemed generous to me, but also made me feel a bit uncomfortable because I wanted to contribute more, but they kind of wouldn't let me. Nicole's dad would tell me, "Don't worry, son, we'll take care of it. You just make sure to make our daughter happy." And I thought, well, I guess that's how traditions work, and didn't think more about it. The last few months before the wedding, Nicole was super stressed with all the details, the venue, the flowers, the dress, the food, and I basically just nodded and said yes to everything because honestly, I didn't care as much as she did. Whether the napkins were ivory or beige, everything changed the day before the wedding. And when I say everything changed, I mean my entire life went to shit in a matter of hours. It was Friday afternoon. I was at the hotel where we were going to stay because, you know, the tradition of not seeing each other before the ceremony. And I was there with my friends having some beers and relaxing before the big day. Around 7 at night, I get a message from Nicole saying that her mom, Margaret, needs to talk to me urgently about a document I have to sign. I thought it would be something about the hotel or the wedding venue, some last-minute paperwork, nothing important. I told her Margaret could come up to my room and we'd talk there. My friends went to their rooms and I stayed waiting without imagining what was coming. Margaret arrived like 20 minutes later, with a manila envelope and a serious face I'd never seen on her before. She told me, "Ethan, we need to talk about something important before tomorrow," and I was like, "Okay, what's up? Everything good?" And she takes out of that envelope a document of like 5 pages, professionally printed, with perfect margins and everything. She tells me, "This is an agreement that Nicole and I prepared. We need you to read it and sign it tonight." I grab it and start reading, and basically, I can't believe it, even while I'm seeing it with my own eyes. It was a contract where I committed to giving Nicole 40% of my salary every month. 40%. It wasn't a normal prenuptial agreement about division of assets in case of divorce. It was literally a document that said that every month, after getting married, I had to transfer 40% of my paycheck to an account in her name, no matter what. I sat there on the hotel bed reading that thing too, 3 times because I thought I was understanding it wrong. But no, it was exactly what it seemed. I asked Margaret, "Is this for real?" And she, with the calmest face in the world, tells me, "Yes, Ethan, it's to secure Nicole's future, so she has financial security within the marriage." I tell her, "But Margaret, we're going to share expenses anyway. Why does Nicole need 40% of my salary directly in her account?" And she answers me something like it's a protective measure, that many modern couples do this kind of thing. I knew that was a lie. None of my married friends have anything like this. And I told her I needed to talk to Nicole immediately. Margaret told me Nicole was sleeping and that I couldn't bother her the night before her wedding, but that if I didn't sign the document, the wedding wouldn't take place tomorrow. I called Nicole like 50 times. I'm not exaggerating, and she wouldn't answer. I sent her messages telling her I needed to talk to her urgently, that her mom was there with a crazy document, and nothing. Zero response. Margaret was still standing there with that stone face waiting for me to sign, and I told her I wasn't going to sign anything without talking to Nicole first. She started getting agitated, told me I was ruining everything. How was it possible I didn't want to give security to my future wife, that if I really loved her I wouldn't have a problem signing? I answered her that love has nothing to do with giving her 40% of my paycheck every month for no reason, and that this seemed more like an extortion plan than a marital agreement. Margaret got super offended by that and told me I was being dramatic and selfish, that tomorrow we had 200 guests waiting and that I was going to look like an idiot if I canceled everything because of my stubbornness. Around 11 at night, Nicole finally called me, and I was already super agitated, like with my hands shaking because I couldn't believe what was happening. I asked her directly if she knew about the contract, and she told me, yes, that it had been her and her mom's idea together. I asked her why the hell she needed 40% of my salary if we were going to share everything anyway, and she said something like it was for her peace of mind, that she had seen many friends end up with nothing when they got divorced, and she wanted to be protected. I told her, "Nicole, but if we're about to get married, you're supposed to trust me. Why are you planning for a divorce before we even get married?" And she got defensive and told me I didn't understand. That it was different for women. That she was just being smart. I asked her how long they'd been planning this, why they hadn't mentioned it to me before, and she told me it didn't matter. That if I really loved her, I would sign the paper, and that's it. That conversation lasted like an hour and went in circles, her insisting it was something normal and necessary, as me saying it was completely absurd and that I felt betrayed because they were basically ambushing me the night before the wedding when I didn't have time to process anything. I told her we needed to postpone the wedding, talk about this calmly, maybe go to couples therapy, but she told me no, that the wedding was tomorrow and I had to decide right now. She gave me an ultimatum. Either I signed the contract or there was no wedding. I told her I couldn't make a decision like that under pressure, that this wasn't right, and she started crying and saying I didn't really love her, that if I loved her, I wouldn't be making such a big deal about a simple paper. A simple paper that took away almost half my income every month, but whatever. Margaret was still there in my room looking at me with that disapproving face, and Nicole crying on the phone, and me feeling like I was in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Finally, and this is something I'm still not sure was right or wrong, I told Nicole, okay, that I would sign the contract. I hung up the phone. Margaret gave me a pen, and I signed that thing, feeling like I was signing my death sentence. Margaret looked relieved and told me, "You did the right thing, Ethan. You're going to make Nicole very happy." And she left with the document, leaving me there alone in that hotel room at midnight, feeling worse than ever in my life. I didn't sleep at all that night. I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what had just happened. If I should cancel the wedding anyway, if I was making the biggest mistake of my life by marrying someone who clearly didn't trust me. But I was also thinking about the 200 guests, about the money Nicole's parents had spent, about my own parents who were so excited, about all our friends who were going to be there. Around 4 in the morning, I made a decision. A decision that many people would later tell me was terrible, but that in that moment seemed like the only option. I was going to go to the wedding. I was going to get to the altar, and there, in front of everyone, I was going to expose exactly what Nicole and her mom had done. I wasn't going to get married, but I was going to make sure everyone knew why. The wedding day arrived and I was a mess. My friends thought it was just Normal groom nerves, but I knew it was much more than that. I put on the suit, went to the church, and everything seemed normal from the outside. The church was beautiful, decorated with white flowers everywhere. My parents were sitting in the front row looking so proud. Nicole's family on the other side equally excited. The moment for the ceremony came, the music started playing, and Nicole appeared at the end of the aisle in that spectacular white dress she'd spent so much time choosing, her dad walking her down the aisle, and everyone stood up and looked at her the way you're supposed to look at a bride on her special day. She got to the altar, and I was standing there feeling like I was going to throw up. The priest started with the typical speech about marriage, love, commitment, and I was just waiting for my moment. When it got to the part where they give you a chance to speak, to say your personalized vows, I took out from my pocket a copy of the contract I had made that morning, at the hotel reception. Nicole saw me take out the paper, and her face completely changed. She went pale and whispered to me, "What are you doing?" But I ignored her. I turned towards all the guests and said, "Before we continue with this ceremony, there's something everyone needs to know." I read the entire contract out loud, every word. The silence in that church was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I read the part where I committed to giving her 40% of my monthly salary. I read the penalties if I didn't do it. I read everything. People started murmuring. I could hear someone saying, "What the hell?" and others making sounds of surprise. Nicole's parents stood up from their seats. Margaret was yelling at me to shut up, that this was unacceptable. Nicole's dad was trying to get up to the altar. My own parents looked confused and horrified. Nicole was standing there crying, yelling at me that I was humiliating her, that how dare I do this on her special day. When I finished reading the document, I tore it to pieces in front of everyone and said, "I can't marry someone who sees me as an ATM instead of a partner." And I left. Just like that. I walked down that aisle with everyone looking at me, some with shocked faces, others murmuring, my friends as confused as the rest. I left the church, got in my car, and went to my apartment. Well, to the apartment I shared with Nicole. Although I guess it wasn't both of ours at that point anymore. The next few hours were absolute chaos. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Calls from my parents, from Nicole's parents, from friends, from family. Nicole's parents left me voicemails yelling at me that I was a monster, that I had humiliated their daughter in front of 200 people, that they were going to sue me for the wedding expenses. My own parents were angry with me too. My mom crying, saying, how could I do something so cruel, that Nicole didn't deserve that public humiliation, no matter what she had done. I wasn't answering any calls. I just sat in the apartment living room in that stupid suit, drinking whiskey straight from the bottle, thinking about what I had just done. Like 2 days later, my parents showed up at the apartment. I hadn't gone out at all. I had basically been locked in there, feeling a mix of relief and horror about what I had done. My dad came in with that serious face he makes when he's disappointed. My mom with red eyes from crying so much. I sat down with them and explained everything from the beginning, about the contract, how Margaret had ambushed me the night before the wedding, how Nicole had given me the ultimatum. My mom calmed down as I talked. My dad too. And when I finished telling them everything, my mom hugged me and told me she understood why I had done what I did, although she wished I had handled it differently. My dad told me that Nicole had been wrong in trying to manipulate me like that, but that I had also been wrong in humiliating her publicly, that there were more mature ways to handle the situation. He was right, I guess, but in that moment, I hadn't thought of anything else. Nicole never came back to the apartment while I was there. Like a week later, I came back from the supermarket and all her stuff had disappeared. Clothes, furniture that was hers, photos, everything. She had left the keys on the kitchen table and nothing else. Not a note, not a message, nothing. It was like our 3-year relationship had been erased in an afternoon. I sat in that half-empty apartment and didn't know whether to feel relieved or devastated. It was a weird combination of both, like I knew I had done the right thing in not marrying her, but I had also lost someone I thought was going to be my wife, my life partner, and it hurt a lot despite everything. Like 3 weeks after all the disaster, Nicole's parents showed up at my work. I was in the middle of a meeting when reception called me, saying there were 2 people waiting for me in the lobby who insisted on talking to me immediately. I went down thinking maybe it was my parents or something, and I find Nicole's mom and dad standing there with faces of absolute fury. We went out to the parking lot because I didn't want to cause a scene in my office, and basically they told me I owed them all the money they had spent on the wedding, like $50,000 according to them. I told them I hadn't asked them to spend that amount, that they had been the ones who insisted on paying for everything, and Nicole's dad yelled at me that it didn't matter, that the wedding hadn't happened because of me, and I had to reimburse them every penny. Margaret started listing all the expenses: the venue, the food, the flowers, the photographer, Nicole's dress that according to her had cost like $10,000 alone, and I told them I wasn't going to pay them anything because they knew perfectly well what Nicole and Margaret had tried to do to me with that contract. Nicole's dad told me that was irrelevant, that Nicole was just trying to protect herself, and I had reacted like an immature child. We argued there in the parking lot for like half an hour until I finally told them to leave or I was going to call security. They left threatening to sue me, although no lawsuit ever came. I guess they knew they didn't have a real legal case. That night I called Nicole for the first time since the wedding. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I needed to close that part of my life somehow. She answered after several rings with a very cold hello, and I told her that her parents had confronted me at my work, demanding money. She sighed and told me she had nothing to do with that her parents were acting on their own. I asked her if she really thought I was going to reimburse them $50,000, and she told me no, that it was ridiculous, but that she understood why her parents were angry. I told her, Nicole, you know what you did was wrong, right? The contract thing, and she stayed silent for a long moment and then told me, I don't know, Ethan, maybe yes, maybe no, but it doesn't matter anymore. We talked like 20 minutes. It was weird, like we weren't yelling or fighting, but we weren't friendly either, just two people who were once in love and now were basically strangers. I asked her if she was okay, and she told me yes, that she had moved in with her parents temporarily while looking for her own place. I told her I was thinking about leaving my job and starting something new because the atmosphere at the office had become uncomfortable after all the drama. Too many people knew what had happened and looked at me weird. We said goodbye cordially, and I hung up, feeling like I had closed a chapter, but without the feeling of satisfaction I thought I would have. 2 months after the wedding that never was, I quit my job. I couldn't stay there with everyone knowing my story, asking me questions, looking at me with pity or judgment depending on the person. My dad offered to invest in a business with me, something about tech consulting that we had been casually discussing for years but had never made real. I accepted his offer and we started working on that, and honestly it was good to have something to focus on besides thinking about all the disaster of my personal life. Like 3 months after the non-wedding, like end of October or beginning of November, I went with some friends to a bar downtown. I needed to go out, distract myself, be normal again. We were there drinking beers and catching up when I see her walk in. Nicole, with a group of girlfriends, laughing, looking good honestly. My first instinct was to get out of there immediately, but one of my friends had already seen her and told me, hey, there's Nicole, and it was too late to escape without it looking obvious. She saw me like 5 minutes later. Our gazes met across the bar full of people, and for a second we both froze. Then she said something to her friends and walked towards where we were. My friends got tense. They didn't know what to expect. Me neither, honestly. Nicole got to our table and said, "Hi, Ethan. Can I talk to you for a moment?" And I nodded and we went outside the bar where it was quieter. We stood there not knowing what to say for a few seconds until she spoke first. She told me, "I'm so sorry about what happened. I'm sorry about the contract. My mom convinced me it was a good idea, and I was scared of being left with nothing if things didn't work out. And I made a terrible decision." I told her I appreciated the apology, but that it didn't change what had happened. She nodded and told me she knew. That she didn't expect me to forgive her or anything. She just wanted me to know she regretted it. I asked her if she really regretted it, or if she was just saying that because we had run into each other, and she laughed a little and said, "I really regret it, although I understand if you don't believe me." We talked like half an hour outside that bar. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in a long time, maybe ever. She told me she had been going to therapy, that she had realized she had issues with control and trust that came from seeing her mom suffer financially after her first marriage. I told her about the business with my dad, how things were going. We didn't talk about the wedding directly, like the details of that day, but we both knew it was there between us, like this giant elephant. Finally, she told me, I hope you find someone who makes you happy, Ethan. You really deserve it. And I told her the same, and we gave each other an awkward hug and said goodbye. I saw her go back into the bar with her friends, and I stayed out there a while longer before going back with mine. My friends asked me what had happened, and I told them basically we'd had some closure, that we'd said the things we needed to say to each other. I don't know if Nicole really changed or if she learned something from all this. I guess I'll never know because I haven't talked again since that night. I blocked her parents on my phone a long time ago. They tried to contact me a couple more times about the money, but eventually gave up. Now, 3 months after everything, I'm okay, I guess. The business with my dad is going better than we expected. I've been on a couple of dates, but nothing serious yet because honestly I need more time to process everything. My parents and I are good. They understand why I did what I did, although they still think I could have handled it differently. Maybe they were right. Maybe exposing Nicole at the altar in front of 200 people was too much. But in that moment, I felt like I had no other choice. I don't regret walking away from that relationship. That's clear. But I do regret how I did it. The unnecessary pain I caused. Not just to Nicole, but to everyone who was there that day, expecting a celebration and ended up witnessing a disaster. Last week, one of my friends who was there that day asked me if I ever think about how things would have been if I had signed the contract and gone ahead with the wedding. I told him yes, that sometimes I think about that, but that I probably would have ended up getting divorced anyway in a few years, just poorer and more bitter. He laughed and told me I was probably right. And that's more or less where I am now. Rebuilding my life, learning to trust again, trying not to let this experience make me cynical about love and relationships. Although it's hard not to be after all this.